The Roman Empire seemed unbeatable at its peak, one of the largest empires the world has ever seen. It fended off all its military foes. It built a complex administrative state that ruled regions from Egypt to Spain to England and as far east as modern-day Iraq. At its height, it seemed like it would rule forever, and today it's a distant memory. Why did the Roman Empire ultimately fall? Did it meet an enemy too powerful to fend off? Was it undone by internal conflict, or did it simply stretch itself too thin? The answer isn't any one of those, and the empire's downfall happened over hundreds of years. To find the truth of the Roman Empire's fall, we have to go back to how it became an empire in the first place, because initially it was a republic with far less territory. The republic had taken over the previously flawed monarchy, but the people seemed to be calling out for more unified government. One man who was willing to answer that call, Julius Caesar, the man appointed perpetual dictator of Rome in the mid-1st century BCE. He started consolidating power, becoming a popular and effective ruler who won many military campaigns, and many of his rivals realized he had no intention of giving up his newfound power. The elite of Rome assassinated him, setting off one of the biggest political crises in Roman history. Civil wars kicked off as many people sought to claim power, and in the end, the war saw Octavian, the adopted son of Caesar, take power. He continued his father's legacy, conquering nearby territories including Egypt, ending the country's Hellenistic era. Soon, he was more powerful than his father ever was, and the Roman Senate responded accordingly. It granted him with the title of Augustus, allowed him to rule in perpetuity, and soon no one would dare challenge his power. The plotters who feared Caesar's role as dictator had accidentally crafted the rise of Rome's first emperor, and he would not be the last. From then, Rome would not only become another monarchy ruled by a series of hereditary leaders, both good and bad, it would develop a hunger for conquest that would envelop a large part of Europe and parts of Asia and Africa. While Italy would continue to serve as the center of the empire, the other territories would be organized into provinces, each administered by a local governor with drastically different approaches to leadership. The empire would be so large that it would be impossible for one leader to maintain full control over every territory, which meant the provinces would still maintain some level of autonomy as long as they pay their taxes and do not cause any problems that would arouse the ire of the emperor. And the system seemed to be working. The empire was stable enough that the next 2 centuries became largely known as the Pax Romana, but under the surface, trouble was brewing. During the 1st century CE, religious conflicts started brewing under the surface. The Roman Empire largely worshipped the traditional pantheon led by Jupiter and heavily tied to the Greek pantheon led by Zeus. This polytheistic faith was characterized by ornate temples dedicated to individual gods and a wild law that made the gods seem rather petty and human. Jupiter's dalliances with human women and gods, taking revenge for the most petty grievances, were both common staples of the faith in those days. And then came Christianity, spinning out of the teachings of the Jewish rabbi known as Jesus and his eventual crucifixion by the Roman authorities. This new Abrahamic faith was based on the often persecuted faith of Judaism and largely received the same treatment in the early days, while some of the more dramatic stories, like early Christians being fed to lions, have no historical backing. The Roman Empire saw new faith as a threat to the establishment, but religions aren't easy to kill. The conflict stayed under the radar, and Christianity was mostly a small faith during the early years, and a wise emperor would have likely focused on maintaining the empire's stability rather than persecuting heathens. But when you have a monarchy, you are often relying on the whims of birth order and genetics. And in the year 177, Rome's luck ran out. The new emperor, Commodus, who would soon become infamous for this exact reason. The youngest emperor ever at the age of 15, his rule was dictated by his emotions, which led to recklessness. The teenager, making bad decisions when given too much power, perished the thought. As he was inheriting the empire built by many of his predecessors, it was hard for him to screw up the larger things. But back in Rome, he wasted no time throwing things into chaos. He was known for his fickle dictatorial leadership style, as well as his love of the gladiator matches in a coliseum. He would even participate in duels himself, which largely meant anyone who faced off against him would probably be expected to die quietly. He built a cult of personality around himself, and his reign was so chaotic that he would eventually be immortalized by Joaquin Phoenix as a villain in the Oscar-winning movie Gladiator, and his reign ended as it began, with chaos. Commodus was assassinated by a wrestler in the Roman baths after 15 years in charge, and things would only get more chaotic from there. The Roman Senate declared him a public enemy and tore down his statues, and he was succeeded by a new emperor in what would become known as the Year of the Five Emperors. It was 193 CE. and civil war ensued. The next emperor would be assassinated only 3 months after taking office. His successor would essentially pay off the guards to let him become emperor, and he would be ousted and executed only weeks later. The chaos would only die down when 2 emperors, Septimus Severus and Claudius Albinus, ruled simultaneously, despite both considering the other to be a threat. Rome's political climate was in complete chaos, and soon people outside would start noticing. Many of the provinces of Rome had been semi-autonomous for a long time and had developed their own cultures. So as the Roman state spiraled into chaos, they started to wonder, why not just make it official? As the Romans struggled through a series of weak, crazy and inconsequential emperors, often in quick succession, territories started to break away at an increasing rate. First came the self-declared Gallic Empire, which took most of the territory of modern-day France and England with it. Then came the Palmyrene Empire, which was led by Queen Zenobia and took over much of Egypt and the eastern coast of the Mediterranean, including the many key sites in the Holy Land. It was the biggest crisis in Rome's history, but it would bring many changes with it. A series of 3 emperors in the 3rd century would bring this crisis to an end, but the Roman Empire that emerged from it would not be the same. First was Aurelian, who only reigned for 5 years but had a huge impact. At the time, the diminished Roman military was under attack by barbarian tribes and internal strife, and it seemed like the empire's days might be nearing an end. But Aurelian had risen through the ranks of the military and knew its workings well, and under his reign, he fended off the attacking tribes and conquered both the Palmyrene Empire and the Gallic Empire. He surrounded Rome with mighty walls and abandoned provinces that were too much trouble to keep, and improved Rome's economy. Under this short tenure, Rome started to look more like it did at its peak. His successors would build on his word. Diocletian would reign for 20 years and was also a military veteran, but most of his military work had been completed already. He would focus his efforts on improving the empire's stability, which included creating a system of regional courts that would give the empire more control over its far-flung provinces. While the empire had reclaimed the territory lost to the breakaway provinces, Diocletian started expanding once again, and by the end of his 20 years, he became the first Roman emperor to abdicate his position voluntarily, retiring to the palace. But his successor might have had an even bigger impact. The 31-year run of Constantine the Great would be among the most successful in the empire's history. He introduced a new currency, expanded the empire's territory, and reorganized the army to be more effective. But his most significant change was his conversion to Christianity, reportedly spurred on by him seeing a cross in the sky. As the Roman emperor converted, so did many of the citizens of Rome, igniting Christianity's rise to becoming a world power religion. At the end of his reign, the empire's territory was near its peak, expanding as far east as Byzantium. After his death, Constantine left the empire to his sons, starting a new dynasty that would rule over Rome. The Roman Empire looked as healthy as ever, and many people assumed that this was the beginning of a new golden age. So how could things go so wrong? The year was 337 CE when Constantine passed away, and while Constantine's reign had been full of successes, there was trouble lurking under the surface. His embrace of Christianity had given the church massive power in Rome, and although many supported him in this decision, there were some who didn't wish for the empire to fall under the grasp of Christianity. Enemies of the state were executed, and their estates were given to those he favored. The military were paid well, but soon the soldiers seemed to be engaging in blatant corruption. But the empire was still the greatest power in the world, and it was hard to imagine anyone challenging it. But empires aren't immune from internal strife. In the aftermath of the death of Constantine, the throne of the empire was once again open for contest, and this era led to many conflicts over who would take control. Constantius II, one of his sons, emerged as the victor after a series of violent clashes, but many people within Rome remained suspicious of the motives of the royal family. When he passed away 24 years later, his successor was the ambitious general Julian, who had led many successful military campaigns and seemed to be exactly what Rome needed. But Julian didn't feel the same way about Christianity that Constantine did, and sought to roll back the religious changes that had defined Constantine's rule. That left many people within the empire feeling as if the pendulum was swinging too fast, and his reign was cut short by his death in battle only 2 years later. The more things changed, the more they stayed the same. When Julian died in battle, the empire entered another chaotic period where many people tried to claim the throne, and it would soon be decided that the empire was simply too big for any one person person to rule. The Eastern and the Western Roman Empire were created in 395 CE, each with their own emperor, and a period of rapid decline ensued. This divided empire left the Roman legions undermanned and unable to put down the constant attacks from barbarian tribes. The result was a slow disintegration of Rome's territory over the next 81 years. But why did the Western Roman Empire fall first? While the Eastern Roman Empire was closer to the Middle East and Africa and was gaining influence over them, the Western Roman Empire was more isolated. The threats to them came from the north as the Goths and Vandals became increasingly aggressive and influential, while the legions were able to fend off their attacks for a long time. The day came when it became impossible to hold back the tide, and the Goths sacked Rome in 410 CE, marking the first time in 800 years that Rome had fallen to a foreign enemy. The empire was losing its influence and could no longer afford to support many of its provinces, but it would hold for another 66 years. The last emperor was Romulus Augustulus, who ruled for only a year before being ousted by the barbarian general Odoacer, who took control of Rome in 476 CE. While many historians consider this the end of the Roman Empire, that's not technically accurate. Rome had already lost much of its influence, and the fall of Rome itself wasn't the end of the story. The year 476 is largely a symbolic date. While many consider fall of Rome as the beginning of the Dark Ages and a period of chaos, the truth is a little more complicated. The fall of Rome in the West didn't mean the fall of Roman Empire, as the Eastern Roman Empire will continue to exist for another 1,000 years as the Byzantine Empire, even reclaiming much of the old territory in Europe. However, that wouldn't mark the end of Rome's influence on the world, as a new power would soon rise up in Europe and Africa and look to spread their influence around the world. The Caliphate of the Islamic Golden Age, and Roman influence can still be felt today. The Latin language has become the foundation for much of the language in Europe, especially the Romance languages, and its empire has provided the basis for much of the political science in the Western world. While many look at the old empire as a thing of the past, it still lives on in many of the things we see today, and the Senate still continues to meet in Italy's capital city of Rome.